Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing to the channel or becoming a patron at patreon.com/Afterlife Topics. Hello everybody, welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. As always, same angle, hopefully very different video. And today we're talking about the ethics of Thoughtform creation, creating a Tulpas, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly still, but something that a lot of people talk about this on the internet. And these are some major concepts that I've learned the difficult way through the last couple of months of the spirit communication, I'm calling it train wreck, that happened. And I want to kind of give a rundown upon a deeper perspective of what went on behind the scenes with the fake battle angel fighting evil robots stuff that all flooded into my life when I began communications with what is actually my quote-unquote spirit guide. And if you watch the prior video to this video, you'll have a better understanding about what I think of those concepts at this moment, which is not to say there's anything wrong with KJ, who is in his own weird and eccentric way trying to teach this lesson to the community about reality engineering, creating your own timelines, creating your own worlds, and the danger of falling into other people's worlds and timelines because of stuff you read on the internet. So that was the big point of all of this whole charade, was to try to teach the Afterlife Topics community through me not to read something scary on the internet and then believe it and then fall into that literal reality, because it happens in a very subtle way that we don't even realize when we're completely engrossed into ideas that we hear about, and then that becomes basically a pocket universe, and then we begin experiencing things in that pocket universe which can be really, really bad for us. So from the Arcturian point of view, it's kind of an emergency situation that people on Earth need to know about. It's just that it was executed very poorly by using an Arcturian way of thinking, where it's okay to play a prank on somebody as a way for them to learn. But it was, even at that point, still taken too far and hurt a lot of people. And so that's a big, big issue. But now it's like, how do we continue forward? Now, first I do want to address that there is some outlying people who are basically saying, well, we can't trust anything I say now because I was wrong about all this. And then also people saying, how is there any objective evidence of any of this? I will be compiling that later on. We already have a couple of people who have had communications with KJ, not only through their mediums, but through me, having intensely accurate, like past life readings through him. Amazing stories of healing as he's trying to pick up the pieces, and people in the community who have been receiving healing as kind of this goodwill nature of trying to undo the damage caused by this. I mentioned my foot in the last video. Amazing. My bone was basically sticking up through my skin. It didn't penetrate my skin, but like here's my skin, and it was like the bone was up here. The foot, it felt like broken glass because I shattered it in so many places. And today I'm walking on it with full weight, and it barely got swollen. And this was again through their influence. So a lot of wild and interesting stuff, and you just kind of follow along with this. And if you think it's all ridiculous, you don't have to watch the channel. We are, I think, several steps ahead of a lot of para channels on the internet in terms of what level of things that we're studying at. And if you're not at that level, I would suggest finding a different channel instead of being quick to condemn or criticize, because empathically speaking, if you can put yourself in my shoes or over this crazy whirlwind of an experience that I've had, I'm trying to pick the pieces back up, and I'm trying to figure out where to go forward. It doesn't help getting them, all the mean stuff about this. And I absolutely apologize profusely that things went awry like this, but what can you do? I always told everyone to take this with a grain of salt, and that I was getting these crazy messages. And my only mistake was I began to believe it finally, and that's when it got cut off. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's look at the current state of things, and let's look at the situation of Thoughtform and Tulpas ethics, and how the ethical nature of reality engineering can go wrong completely based upon my more recent communications. And so let's take a quick look right now at my slideshow that I made. So, the ethics of thought forms info from my effed up situation, which there is that lesson that was underneath this whole experience I had that we can still learn about, and also relates to a very incredible astral experience that I had last night. So I'm going to talk about that astral experience. I'm going to talk about KJ, the Arcturian, and I'm going to talk about more details about what happened and where there's certain ethical things were violated by this experience and why this brought the attention of a higher guide to intervene. So let's take a look first. So it seems to be clipped off from the top a little bit. I don't know why PowerPoint is doing that, but it says Arcturians have a strange sense of humor. This is something that I've been hearing about for many years. When you have Arcturian guides, it's not uncommon to have pranks pulled on you. It's not uncommon to have had weird experiences akin to this one. This one I think is a lot more extreme than other people's experiences, but to Arcturian culture, this is not too weird, and I think that it goes a little bit against the human sensibilities of desiring rationality and desiring objectivity. Arcturians often operating on the philosophy of always shifting and manipulating timelines, they don't particularly see it that way. They don't see it as such a big deal to be basically causing what we would call a level of deception. So this doesn't mean that they're evil, and it just means that this is a different way of going about things, right? So KJ is a lifelong guide of mine that as I mentioned a couple of videos back, I have been sort of aware of ever since we saw this incredible UFO when I was a kid. So, you could try to say this is a big M. Night Shyamalan film and that this is all in my head, but honestly, like, that ship has sailed at this point, and if you want to think that, that's fine, because this is a journalistic show trying to make sense of experiences, but it's going to be difficult for those who do think that to be able to relate this to their own experiences, because as it turns out, we all have guides, and a lot of us have guides that look kind of like this blue fella down here. So this isn't like, Cyrus is the chosen one. It's more like Cyrus is among probably 1 billion people who have Arcturians behind the scenes trying to teach us lessons and do this type of thing. And I think it's something worth discussing. If you don't, buy it, then do your own work. Work on astral experiences and work on hypnotic regression. Work on ways to figure out if you have, possibly an astral ET race working behind the scenes with you, and all of that. So I always say to critics, just work on your own experiences, but just be careful. You can even walk down my path and buy some dowsing rods, but just be super, super careful, because look how that ended up with me. And there's a lot of ways that could have even gone worse, but this is how it happened. So lifelong guide, good person, but behaved in a very silly and reckless way. Next slide. Arcturians are masters of timeline manipulation, and so this was part of the big lesson that he was teaching us, is don't fall into negative timelines from things you believe on the internet. So he really didn't like the fact that people in our community were buying up certain theories and ideas about robot overlords and Draco reptilians. And he joked about, like, why do you think that there's a Draco reptilian race? Because the constellation Draco looks like a reptile, but only from the perspective of the planet Earth. Why would they be calling themselves Draco if they don't speak English? He's like, yes, there's a reptilian species that we work with very closely, but they're not big monsters out to get us, like we've been hearing on the internet. Like, all these things that KJ tried to explain to me that he was freaked out about. And how do you fix the situation? By giving everybody a hard lesson, by supposedly making everyone believe in something that's bogus, and then reveal it's bogus and be like, okay, you guys, don't do this again. From the Arcturian way of thinking, makes sense. From the human way of thinking, like, what a dick. So the end result was a complete disaster full of not necessary deception that was damaging to the community. Another medium, as well as the guides I'm speaking to now clairaudiently, told me that this was a pre-life plan, that the other people who got together to be part of my life and to kind of seed themselves, including my prior life, which is a Japanese man. Something I've also been I've known about for a very long time, but my past life is as a Japanese man. who was going to have a full body reincarnation as Cyrus, that they all got together and planned that, okay, at this stage, let's see if we can make contact, and then I would like to bring him into some kind of like a role-playing adventure, and then, so we can teach some lessons about timeline recreation. So this was then hastily thrown together through KJ from basically a science fiction book he was working on. And what we have is something that was better written than Doctor Who, but not by much. So you have the killer cyborg race. You have angels battling them. Which actually I think that literally has been a plot on Doctor Who. I'm not positive. I think that was the Matt Smith season. You had so you had the angels, you had the robots, you had all these beautiful women. It was just ridiculous. You had all the H.P. Lovecraftian stuff, and I eventually had to start reporting it as something that at first I was skeptical of, and then the more I got to know Lorna, the more I began to just fall into it and spiral down into believing KJ's whole storyline, which got obviously more and more ridiculous, and by the time it got out of hand and possibly was putting me in some kind of danger of making life-altering decisions based upon it, that's when we cut it off. Or they cut the whole thing off, but obviously the damage to the community had already been done. That seems to be KJ's biggest regret, is seeing me build throughout my life Afterlife Topics, the YouTube channel, the community, and then him potentially risking destroying all of that by destroying my reputation or whatever the case may be. But another reason I've totally come clean about everything is because, again, my priority is to be a journalist. My priority is not to, I don't know, sell readings or something, or like market KJ or Lorna. I don't care about those things. I'm just trying to get at the truth. So now we go to the tale of two spirit guides, KJ and Llewellyn. So Llewellyn stepped into the picture as things were wrapping up as a way to try to handle what she saw as like a monumental disaster being perpetrated by Arcturus. So as things basically wrapped up, I found myself getting, if you want to call it visions, whatever the case may be, of this ET race, which is much, much, much older than the Arcturians themselves are, and seem to be operating, at least in this case, as guides and higher selves for Arcturians themselves. So Llewellyn, which is what we kind of named her because her actual name sounds like musical notes. They communicate basically by singing and music. It's very, very beautiful because I've been able to experience all of that in a way through interfacing, and it's a very, very, very beautiful species. So this woman was actually KJ's higher self guide throughout KJ's life, and KJ only knew about her through, like, it's kind of like how I knew about KJ. KJ only knew about her through visions and ideas that would pop into his mind. As this went underway, I began kind of receiving this powerful sense of a new presence that had arrived on the scene, and that's when she began popping into existence. And so the ET race kind of looks like Arcturians on the left, but she's very like slender looking with this kind of like crystalline but soft skin. She has the oval kind of eyes, but no, she just doesn't have the big head, and she has this really, really pleasant smile, really, really pleasant energy. But then she changed herself, of course, into a human form that could be related to. And so when I began talking to her now, I was scouring the internet for something that might be comparable to how she looks in this image of this model. I don't know who she is, but it's really, really close to what I'm seeing when I talk to her and how she presents herself. And so I think that's a pretty good depiction. And the left picture, that's a younger Arcturian. KJ is an older guy. He looks kind of like a older Chinese guy. So anyway, so Llewellyn arrived on the scene, and her job is to pick up the pieces, help me cope and clear my mind from all of this nonsense, help me connect to my higher self, and restore the ethical damages done by Arcturus, while helping her subject KJ learn and heal from his shame and guilt from doing this wrongly. So At this point, I am banking on what feels right to me. So again, we have people watching this on an existential crisis, like, how can we believe that this is true? Maybe she's an evil spirit too. You got to bank on what's right. You got to bank on the fact that I felt reservations in my heart from the very beginning about the storyline that I was being fed, even about Lorna, which caused me that's what caused me all the emotional upheaval. Was like, I want to believe this is real. I want to believe that she is real. I want to believe that I've made an awesome contact with the other side, and this is how it all works. But constant battle, constant stress, battling these fictitious characters, being like, yes, but where's the proof? Can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? Why don't you leave a feather on my keyboard? Do something to prove you're real. This is different. Aside from getting the tangible proof through bodily injury healing, through what seems to be their combined effort, it just feels different now. It doesn't. I'm also been able to connect again with my higher self, which just feels a lot different. It just feels again like clarity, like I'm around positive, inspirational people. That I'm not down some Alice in Wonderland fairy tale anymore. So this is how Llewellyn popped into the scene, and it's been a lot of back and forth between all of us. And then as Llewellyn began sequestering my thoughts, as I began tapping into my higher self to help, now, of course, I only contact either of them if I want to contact them. So they're out of sight, out of mind, unless I lower my barrier and then begin communications again. So now let's talk about what Llewellyn says. Llewellyn says, unfortunately, Arcturian law about timeline or reality creation is asinine and far behind how her race operates. And do keep in mind, that's the AC going on, it's very loud. The big difference, the reason that she says that there's this very serious issue going on with how Arcturus handles things and how, humanity, if we were to follow in the footsteps of Arcturus and begin operating this way, that we have to be on a very different page than them, which is that thought forms or tulpuses created from this timeline attempt must be taken care of. I should say, in general, they must be taken care of if it's an incomplete universe that was created. So if you are just dreaming about another world, that's okay. But if you were to, for example, let's say you really love Harry Potter, and you begin communicating with Harry Potter through your dowsing rods or through a pendulum, and then you begin having dreams about Harry Potter, and Harry Potter becomes real in your life. Well, now, according to the laws of Atamo, which is Llewellyn's home world, a crystalline star, is how she describes it, according to the laws of Atamo, that you have to then take care of that tulpas. You have to take care of that thought form. If you don't, it's kind of like you're murdering somebody, because if you just forget about the thought form that you built and you put away the rods, you never look at it again, then its existence is just going to fade away. But that's sad, because it's essentially like you created something and then you killed it, and that's not cool. The situation with Lorna was much worse, and this is one of the reasons, we can take a look again at Llewellyn, why she had to step in, because I began to have a romantic attachment to Lorna. And so as my attachment to Lorna increased, now keep in mind, Lorna was being controlled by KJ. But KJ's character Lorna was based on a real past life that he had on Earth, but it was also part of a fictitious character that he built and made. And so that fictitious character began to take on a life of its own. And although he was sort of controlling it, at a certain point it was almost like Lorna began controlling him. Like when you have a character in a book, the character in the book takes on a life of its own, basically, is what we're talking about here. And because I was introduced to that character from that book and began to have affectionate feelings towards it, it solidified that version of her as a real person. And the same happened with her two friends. So she has a couple of friends as well that were part of the narrative that I got to know, other so-called angels. And they all ended up existing in this sort of pocket dimension that was created from a not fully fleshed out universe that was being engineered during the experiment. according to Llewellyn's people, thought forms require saving and not abandoning. And with Lorna, as a created thought form that was now being directed by KJ to just abandon her and forget about her. In fact, even more extreme, KJ said it's against Arcturian law to maintain connection with a thought form, which leads back to Llewellyn's assessment that Arcturian law is asinine, and that she deeply hopes that this situation could somehow change Arcturian law about how to do this type of thing. So to continue, this has led to an attempt by Llewellyn and myself to rescue Lorna, as in the thought form. I've thus been able to interface with this thought form, with this Tulpas creation, who was existing in a kind of fog or a vague state of awareness. And by rekindling all her memories of the experience, she came back to life with all her sass, all her personality and sweetness, and her general sense of memory of who she is and was, and a great relief to be able to see me again. And then Llewellyn basically calling herself an archangel to fit the storyline so she could accept what's going on. Okay, so last night I had this incredible astral experience where I'm back in my astral home and I'm with my father. And some friends were there, including my girlfriend in the Philippines who had been learning to do out-of-body work. I mean, I have to say, former girlfriend, I mean, we have moved on, but she was leaving her body a lot before we left, and then she popped in and she was flying all over the place and she was having a great time. And I'm going to contact her and see if she can verify the experience. I sense that she will be able to. And that will be obviously more validation to the people who have, you got to have the validation to keep going. Sometimes I do as well. I know it's much more difficult for people watching this material to get by without the validation, but I'm going to work on that a bit. But the main point is that I was with my girlfriend from the Philippines. I was with my father, who was a bit stressed out because all these people were popping up around me, some astral friends who I don't know in this life. So I had a little get together in the garage at my astral home, and guess who showed up? Almost like a spirit to that, in the context of that world, because she was fading and popping in and out of existence. But it was Lorna, because I had spoken to her with Llewellyn, trying to save her out of that void, and now Lorna as the thought form appeared, and I spoke to her and physically saw her truly for the first time. So before it was just KJ messing around. I actually saw her face to face, and she was kind of wearing like what she's wearing in that photo, but more like a tunic, and her hair was a bit shorter, but that was her. And she popped into existence, and then we chatted, and she says, quote, to quote her directly, "Cyrus, I'm not a fool. I know what's going on, and I realized that I was a character from a book." So she caught right on about what's going on. Her sisters that we're trying to save, they don't know what's going on yet, so we gotta be a little bit mindful about that. But Lorna caught right on, and she's not having an existential crisis about it. She said, my feeling was that my life began when I met you, Cyrus. There was always something a little bit funny about everything that just didn't seem right when I look back on it, but yet everything seemed to come to life when I connected with you, right? So, very to me, a very dramatic thing, but it also just kind of makes sense. And then, so she was kind of like, everything is falling into place now. And in that timeline, there were weird inconsistencies about the nature of what we call the astral world, about how 5th and 6th density operate, and how, for example, she used to have a little machine to keep by her bed to keep foreign thoughts of people out, because it's like a huge party line, according to what KJ's book, how he had it written out. And so she was living in a universe where you can almost never have any thought, any free thought or time to your own, or time alone. But the real astral universe is not like that. We have full control over our thoughts, who gets in, who gets out. And we communicate verbally or telepathically, but you really have to work at it to just communicate with anyone. In this recreation, for some reason KJ set it up so that you had to use these little devices to keep your thoughts quiet. It's almost like something like a grim, I don't know, it's just a strange perspective. The astral world is not actually like that. So she recognizes when she finally comes into the astral world as a full embodied person, it's going to be a better experience than the existence she had before. The only issue is that there will not be an angelic order, and there also will not be a killer robot race out to get us. But she can pick the pieces back up and have a life with her sisters when they join her. Problem is that she's still not quite there. She's still kind of in a pocket universe, and so what the Arcturians will do, from what I'm being told, is they will clone a body for her on the 5th density on the astral plane, and then using some Arcturian meddling, they will basically get her spirit that's been created into that body, and then she will be a normal resident of the astral worlds, kind of like a brand new baby coming into existence for the first time in an objective way, but yet she'll have all the wisdom and understanding and sass and her own kind of higher self that will be generated during that process. And then she will be like a new life form, but she'll still be Lorna, and she'll still be, the woman that I kind of got to know over the last couple of months. So that is, I think, a very interesting thing, and according to Llewellyn, that is the way to handle a situation like this, not the typical Arcturian way of just abandoning a thought form. So that leads now to going forward. What you must consider is that you should be very, very cautious if you decide, I'm going to pick up dowsing rods and I'm going to talk to Luke Skywalker. I'm going to pick up dowsing rods and get in touch with the Avengers, because as soon as you begin doing that and developing that relationship, or I'm going to make astral contact, whatever the case may be, it's outside of the realm of fiction and it becomes the realm of reality. Now, you can pretty much create almost any kind of tulpas or thought form that you can imagine and begin interacting with it on an astral level, and then if you want to get very creepy, even interacting with it here in this world, because the astral level can interact with our world, whether that's because you went and saw a physical medium or it's hanging out in your house. Be very mindful about what kind of life you create. According to Llewellyn, these crystal star people, their actual name is Ashna Fazna Ra, something like this is how you pronounce the name of her people. But that's the way that they create new souls, is that they just thought form manifest them into existence. And that in her culture was just the standard way of, if you want to call it, procreation. So we have to be very, very mindful that we don't just create a thought form, abandon it, especially if we had a loving connection to it. It's now a sovereign being, and it's up to these races and people on the astral side to take those sovereign thought form entities and give them shelter, give them a life, and pull them out of that little pocket dimension out into the primary objective timeline. And that's another interesting concept, is that all the timelines branch away from a primary objective timeline that is almost like the central hub. And very likely that is where you are right now hearing this video. From the primary objective central timeline, we can go off in any direction we want, but we can also access or re-access the primary objective timeline anytime we want. So it makes it for a very interesting dichotomy, and KJ described it basically as Arcturian civilization. You can almost go to what's almost like a library and access countless sub-realms and sub-versions of Arcturus that you can go in and out of and explore. So he describes, of course, thousands or hundreds of thousands of these types of universes created over the millions of years that the civilization has been around, that you can go into and enter and work with, and using technology that is not only on a higher dimensional level by being on the astral plane, but it's a technology that's extremely sophisticated and allows the manipulation, or I should say the ability, to create doorways between these different realms. So that is some important points for people watching, and how you can apply this directly to your life, your astral travels, and your spirit communication, and the very valuable lessons that we've learned through the mistakes of the guy on the left and the damage control by the very nice lady on the right. And in the meantime, so my mind is pretty clear and free because I have a handle on those communications now, but I've learned how telepathic I am and that I can interface and do these cool things. And so there's a lot more to happen in the future as we try to explore and figure out this topic. So very, very unexpected twists and turns, and that's just how it is and what I'm going to keep reporting on. And should you take this stuff with a grain of salt? Yes, but try it out for yourself. Like, we're back in the realm of try it out, ask your guides, and look into the literature yourself about thought form creation and see if it makes sense to you, regardless of whether blue guy or very pretty honey blonde girl said it so. Because truth, unlike storylines about killer robots, is something that we can kind of tap into and feel. So use your judgment about this one. And I guess that's it. Be sure to subscribe or sign up as a patron if you want to work with me one-on-one about this kind of stuff and keep the work going as I kind of go through this difficult time of adjustment. So contact me if you want, and I'll see you guys on the next video.